So chances are, if you're watching this video, that's because you either own or are thinking about buying a gimbal and you're trying to get the most silky smooth cinematic shots you could possibly get. Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So let's do it. What's good, creative fam? Brandon Washington here, and first of all, if you're brand new to the channel, this channel is all about filmmaking gear, tips, and tutorials, and so definitely consider hitting that subscribe button if you're into that stuff. But as I mentioned before, in this video, we're going to be talking about gimbals, talking about how to get the most out of our gimbals. Now, let's get one thing clear. Obviously, gimbals are a big part of, just filmmaking in general today. It seems like every company is coming out with new gimbals, and I can't even lie, I have my own little addiction to buying gimbals. But please don't judge me. Every gimbal makes sense in purchase, sort of. It makes sense to me, so don't judge me. But just because you have a gimbal doesn't mean that you're gonna get great footage out of it. I mean, the hardest thing that I see when most people have gimbals is they kind of use them as floating tripods, which really doesn't do the gimbal justice. So today we're gonna be looking at 5 easy tips that you can quickly implement into your gimbal game to easily step up your footage. All right, so tip number 1 is really basic, but it is all in how you walk. The first thing that gives away bad gimbal work is when your actual footage is bouncing up and down, up and down. However, you can quickly fix this with the way you walk. So typically the way that I walk when I'm using a gimbal is I try to bend my knees, kind of have a slight bend as I walk, and then I walk from heel to toe, really emphasizing the walking. Sometimes I pay so much attention to how I'm walking that I'm not really watching my framing. I'm more so kind of watching it out of my peripherals, because if you plan the shot out properly, you'll know what you're gonna get before you shoot it. And so really focusing in on how you walk can definitely add a lot more smoothness to your movement with your gimbal. All right, now tip number 2 is gonna go in kind of like a sequence with the next few tips, but they're all about different types of movements, which tip number 2 is all about revealing shots. See, the best part about gimbals is the fact that they can move, and it really helps to sell that movement when you're revealing from behind something or using something in the foreground to really show that movement. Case in point, I always like to find something that almost fills the frame entirely and then kind of bring my gimbal from around that or from behind that to really emphasize that movement. Revealing shots can come from all different types of things. You can come from, things like a light pole, or you can use something really small, or sometimes you can even just reveal from the ground. Just being able to have a little bit of movement in your reveal and having that item in the foreground really sells that movement, which is ultimately movement is why you're using a gimbal to begin with. Continuing that along with tip number 3 is don't just try to move your gimbal kind of with your subject, move your gimbal up and down. So this is another type of movement that you can add easily to your gimbal shots. Being able to move your gimbal up to reveal your subject or actually bring your gimbal down can really throw off the way the viewer is actually interacting with your video, showing them different angles and moving the camera in ways that they didn't necessarily expect the camera to move can really draw them into the story, especially when it works in the way that you're trying to tell that story. All right, now tip number 4 is find that unlocked feature within your gimbal. See, it seems like nowadays every gimbal that comes out with some type of new thing. For example, with like the Movi cell phone gimbal, they actually allow you to do a barrel roll with the gimbal, which is really cool, and no other phone gimbals can really do that. And now actually with the DJI RONIN-S, you can do something very similar to that, allowing it to roll on its axis. find out new ways to use your gimbal and tricks and actually start implementing those into your videos. I personally am a huge fan of this roll feature. It definitely spices things up, even for videos that you wouldn't necessarily think to use them for. Like for example, I've actually even used this like in one of my real estate videos, and it really does add that extra level to the video and kind of spices it up and makes it a little bit more fun. So find out what that cool feature is that your gimbal can do and implement that into your videos. Even if you don't think it should fit there, try it out, because 9 times out of 10, the client just likes seeing something new. And tip number 5 has to do with using your gimbal not like a gimbal. So what I mean is the gimbals are so diverse now and they can do so many things, but there are a lot of shots that have been around for years before the gimbal came around that now the gimbal can actually basically do the same thing. For example, one of my favorite ones is a jib shot. Now, I am probably one of the few people that when jibs started to become more price affordable, I actually went out and bought one, and I still have my jib. I love it, but the problem is my gimbal can now do basically the same things that my jib could do, and it's lighter, easier to set up, and I can move with it. So being able to pull off shots like jib shots or like slider shots, or even some just like straight down type shots by using something like, you know, a monopod to hold it. These are all different types of shots that typically would not be used by a gimbal, but looking at them and saying, okay, how can I pull off a jib shot with my gimbal is a great way to kind of unlock more things you can do with your gimbal. Now I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking like, okay, well what about those other tips that everyone else talks about, like making sure your camera's balanced correctly and making sure you don't overweight the motors and things like that. Those aren't really tips I wanted to add into this, 5 videos, because I wanted to give you guys the top 5 tips that I could come up with and that I use on a regular basis. But if you guys have any additional tips, please leave those down in the comments. I'd love to know what they are. I'd also like for you guys to talk amongst the comments, figure out what if somebody else is using and maybe give that a shot, and let me know what you guys come up with. But thank you guys again so much for checking out this video. Check out some of these other videos I put out. Hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. Wow, that was a lot. I asked them to do a lot at the end of this video. Maybe they'll do one of them. Hopefully subscribe. Hopefully they'll subscribe.